do one with the head being lower. Let's start with a collarbone, sternum, lower part of the rib cage. And when I'm drawing this rib cage in, I'm actually imagining a sphere below that. Let's make a sphere real quick. Halfway to black, the hue, right? You and I both know that that has a very round volume. And when I'm drawing these forms, from practicing this a lot, I'm almost tracing in an imaginary form like that. So if we just took that aside and said, okay, forget the character design that we were doing. If I asked you to draw a wireframe on top of the sphere, yeah, no problem. Yeah, you could probably figure it out. And if it's difficult at first, you keep trying it and you could probably come up with something that feels like it's following the form and orienting on the geometry of it. Now, again, this isn't perfect, but the point is to understand that you're drawing and sketching almost on top of an invisible three-dimensional volume. And so down here, when I'm drawing that rib cage, I'm letting this bottom part of the rib cage wrap around this thing that's not actually there, but when I'm sketching, I'm imagining that it's there. And more of an intuitive thing at this point, but that's how you think about it. And that's for all the parts of it. So you would imagine also spheres for the shoulders, the arms, and then cylinders for, you know, the upper arm and the forearms. Think in 3D so that when you design armor, it can sit on top of it also as three-dimensional forms. All right, so we can start with that. Let's get the rib cage in there. Let's just really make it a messed up, crazy, silly, over-the-top proportion. Really tiny, stubby legs. Maybe he's like borrowing the anatomy proportions of a corgi. And now that gives us opportunity to probably make the upper part way bigger and maybe the head way higher. Or let's try lower, yeah. Maybe over here, like he's hunching over. And then let's put these shoulders, we had them at this place lower than the original. And let's see if we go even lower with that shoulder on this character. So let's put it here, here. We'll put the elbow there, the wrist there. Get the cylinders in for the arms. And now we have a completely new proportion set that you can use for other characters as well. And that's the kind of beauty of iterating like this. And we'll do some more. Maybe the head is really big this time. So I'll pretend that's the head, that's the rib cage, shoulders. I don't always draw the sphere here, but sometimes I'll add a sphere there to imply that that's the upper body and the lower body rotate against. Maybe this is a kind of younger dwarf. And usually the bigger the head of a character, the more youthful they tend to look, because if you imagine a baby, their head is really big in proportion or in relative proportion to the rest of their body. This time, instead of making the elbow look really low, we can make the elbow pretty high and the wrist really low, which implies a much longer forearm. And if you look at the anatomy of certain chimpanzees or orangutans, their forearms are really long, and you could kind of play that up in your own proportions. Okay, let's add a bit of stuff. And you can like have that as a, like I said earlier, a mannequin that you can dress up later with actual elements of design. So on top of this, if we know that a cylinder is the form of the arm here, right? We know that, we were pointing at it. It's extremely obvious, we're not idiots. That's what it is. From there, we can extrapolate and say, well, if we just take that same form and make it bigger, well, we start to have a little bit of the armor, right? So whatever forms you set up in the beginning expand outward as indications of what armor could be like. And that even goes down to like the shape of armor reflecting anatomy. So if you have, you know, the deltoids, bicep, tricep, forearms, so on and so forth. You have the pectorals, abdomen. I'm just scribbling it, not too crazy here. Latissimus dorsi, serratus anterior. These shapes can also start to indicate the shapes of the armor that you add. We could take these shapes and suddenly we have this kind of football shape, that's the deltoid to begin with, and simplify it down to a lower poly, and suddenly we have a shape that fits the anatomy. And over here you could have some kind of band, and then here you can have something that follows the striations of the pectoral muscles. And then we subconsciously pick that up as recognizable because it's following the forms that we know our bodies to be. And same thing here, here's a cylinder. Well, we could take that and make it way bigger as a cylinder, which I think you've already done, but for now, this is what I want you to practice. All right, I'll do one more just for the heck of it. We could just start with a ball this time, the rib cage that we're going for, but we could play it up different shapes here even. Instead of a sphere, like that red ball that we made, let's make it more of an egg. And that alone will shift everything else in the design, because now we're looking at thinner proportions. And, you know, not all dwarves have to be this, you know, bulky, round kind of character. You know, what if he's like more of a aristocrat kind of dwarf, and he doesn't believe in going out to battle, and he's more of a bureaucrat. And for relative reference, let's just sketch another character to kind of show the scale. And that helps too when you're doing a character design and you want to indicate a, I guess, size, such as a dwarf. It helps to put other characters next to the one you're doing, so that you have a sense for yourself, but also a lineup for how the character shows up in a bigger context. Okay, so next to these dwarves, we're looking at maybe something like this. Yeah, and so, you know, we got the start of someone that could be like Gimli or Torbjorn from Overwatch. And then this is more like Tracer or even Legolas, although I think Legolas would be taller than that. Something to add to this, if you're struggling with making the pose feel more natural, I would say observe and try to draw from figure drawing. There's a lot of reference packs like from Graffiti Studios, or, you know, go to ArtStation and look at the store. There's plenty of poses. Just look up life drawing and try to keep this in mind in terms of 3D form, gesture, how the body parts kind of occupy volume. Another really good practice is grab a bunch of photos. Take like 30 photos. In the same way that I traced these three-dimensional shapes on top of the character design, do that on top of the photos, just to get a feel for what proportion ought to look like. And pick pictures that you like, that you think have good proportions for your character designs. And do that as a study, so that your brain becomes really familiar with what's possible. It'll also pick up on things on where parts should be. And I, of course, have that series of Reference Wednesday where I do talk about things like that. For example, if I'm drawing a character, I could start with any part really, but if I'm starting with the hip area, on the back of this top cylinder, you could say that's where the spinal cord could be. And wherever this wobbles around, either this way or depending on how the character is, whatever, that will determine the pose and the gesture of everything else. So if you have a spine that's doing something like that, that means the rib cage is going to sit a little bit back. Maybe the character's a little bit more comfortable, and maybe it's balanced by pushing the head a little forward. And that makes these legs kind of hold a strong position like this. Maybe the hands are on the side like that. Try to get really good at gesture, form, volume, cylinders, spheres, all that stuff.